doing their things.
Funny. Okay, got it. Good afternoon. Good snowy afternoon. Welcome to our March 14th, 2023 Curriculum Committee meeting. This meeting is being live streamed and it will be available for viewing on our website at MSAD11.org. We'll call to order. My name is Becky Fless. I am the acting chair of the Curriculum Committee just for today. And we'll go around and introduce ourselves by first names or what, but anyway, go ahead.
Diane Potter. Megan Carlson.
Tony Veep.
Administrative staff.
Angela Hardy, Director of Curriculum. And Terry McGuire is here as the Director of Technology. Just trying to manage. Sorry, I didn't mean to step on you, just trying to help Terry.
Thank you.
The magical Terry McGuire, who helps us with all the things. So the first thing on the agenda today is a policy review. There are 5 of them. So Angela, I will, or Tony, which one of you? Yes, you'll show. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, trying to figure out what you see. You can see the agenda in front of you, right?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So just as an overview, we're going to start with IMBB. Then we're going to kind of switch gears and there's a package, KA, KBF, and then there's a request to rescind KBF E1 and E2. So we'll talk about why. Basically, they're already part of KBF. So we'll just talk through that and get your opinions. Whatever decisions come out of the policy review by this committee will go to policy. They had concluded most of their policy review, but there'll be one more batch coming through this year.
Great.
Okay. So IMBB is currently a policy that we have. It hadn't been reviewed for some time. It's a slightly different title, and this committee actually reviewed it earlier this year, didn't really make any changes, moved it forward, but we needed to activate this policy recently. And in doing so, we learned that there were different interpretations of the policy across the board and administration. And so we decided to not move the policy forward to the board level for reading, and instead consult with our lawyer and check in on what is the statute, what are the laws, all that, and what guidance do we have in ensuring we're all on the same page. And that's really the key. It's just making sure we all interpret policy in the same way. And so in doing that, we actually uncovered the fact that there's been a revision to this policy, and we secured a copy of the revised version, which is this right here, still IMBB. And the revised version clarifies the purpose and process that we were didn't have a unified vision around earlier. And so I'm presenting this to you almost as it was drafted and presented to me. And in fact, you'll see I kept in the notes section for our discussion today. And then based on that, that can be pulled out for policy review, or the policy committee can do that level of work because they may need that note in order to recognize the policy and make some decisions. So hopefully you've had time to read this policy before this meeting. You'll note that the intent is the same, but the way in which they present the material has been shortened. It's a little bit tighter. So, and the title is also clearer. The last one was about when to allow for exempt instruction. And this is the exact same thing, but the clarity is that that accommodation is around what we call sincere beliefs when required instruction is in place. And those sincere beliefs show up really as a discussion point in paragraphs 2, and then as criteria in paragraph 3, sincerely held religious, moral, philosophical beliefs. And then that's where the bold language from chapter 127 is referenced. In chapter 127, section 3.07, that accommodation is clearly written as only religious beliefs. So moral or philosophical beliefs are really a description of the religious beliefs. And then it moves down to requests for accommodations of those beliefs. This part is very similar to the policy we have on the books, with one exception. So it's the same thing. You have the family may make a request in writing to the building principal. If that is, if the family doesn't agree with that decision, they may appeal that request to the superintendent. That is where the decision is final. The superintendent is the leader of the school district and is the administrator in charge of teaching and learning. The school board's role is to implement policy and to support policy, but not to question the instructional decisions at the classroom level of a teacher. That is where the administrator's job comes into play, to really unearth some of that information and determine what is the appropriate next step based on the policy that the board has set. And so this is actually more common practice than the current policy that says you can appeal to the board. So that's something that the lawyer kind of shared. She's like, oh, that's so unusual that you can appeal to the board. It's not the way the current policy stands. And we're like, oh, because you start getting into a lot of sensitive issues that become then the purview of the board at a level that isn't their daily practice. And so then the factors are very much similar. There's a few changes in language structure, but not in intent. So like the way the sentence was framed is a little bit different, but not in intent. And it's, is the course required? Does the accommodation adversely affect the instruction? What's the educational importance, the sincerity of belief that the family has? It has to be named. Can't just say you have one, you have to name it. And where do we stand legally in terms of the requirements coming out of the Maine Department of Education and the exemption request? And then instead of an entire page around possible processes that we can move through, which is where we got a little bit confused, because there was like, if this, then this, if this, then this, if this. It was really confusing. It's been cleaned up to clarify the approach that one may take to move forward, and then the legal references have all been updated. So that's generally the change. I'd love to open it up for discussion on this policy and around the rationale for shifting to this updated policy as a point of gaining clarification and a unified vision across all people who have to design, manage, and implement policy. Diane? I can't see Becky, sorry. I don't know why.
Oh.
I know she's there.
Okay, I just, I wondered, something came before us recently, and I didn't think that moral or philosophical or religious beliefs were part of it.
They
So
were
is
in
that-
the exact same paragraph. And they were, this exact same sentence was in the last policy. I can bring it up if it helps. I'm happy to do that. I just can change the sharing of my screen.
Sure.
Okay, hang on one moment while I do that.
I had looked at the law as well, and I think that had changed sorry, the 206209, I think, had changed to only present the, the religious exemption, I think.
Let me just make it bigger. Can you see it, or do I have to change something? I can, okay, you can see it. Okay, great. So here it is. Hang on, I gotta make it a tiny bit little smaller so I can find it. Here it is. Can you see that? And to Tony's comment, see, this is that page we got all confused on. And you see here conflicts, it says it right here again, conflicts with sincerely held religious beliefs. Down here, we can compare. But there are some, yeah, I think there potentially, this is the legal reference we had to work with, which we didn't get into the last time we activated this policy all that much. And now I've lost my place. And here's the updated. Also now connects to the learning results clearly as a reference point.
And to IJJ also,
Yes, yep, the materials
Another
selection
important-
process.
another important piece. Yeah.
Yep, which we did have to review and use a few years ago.
Yeah. Yep. At the beginning of the pandemic.
Yep.
Tony, you had a question? You're on mute. You're muted.
Oh, sorry, I'll put myself.
Sorry,
Okay.
I think I saw it and I pressed it and muted myself on purpose to, yeah, anyway. Quick reflection on a little bit of a change here that pulls out the appeals to the board process. And as I'm sort of reflecting on our last meeting about this, I think I had noticed, or we had noticed, we're, as a board, we're used to working sort of at the 3,000-foot view, or however we look at that. And then we really got into like very specific instruction elements, which was noticeable to me, and maybe should have been a little bit of a, well, that was the policy that we had, so that's what we were doing. I think the change makes sense. I guess I just want to make sure it makes sense to surrender the power for the board. So in case we have to like look at it more, explain it more to the board. I think, Angela, if I understand you correctly, that the board really, and to bring Becky in a little bit, the board hires one person, the superintendent, to oversee the delivery of our services, right? And so this is sort of that unique position of the old or the active policy is that there's an appeals process built in that we're now going to remove and put into this.
Well, let me be super clear. I'm going to go
Sure.
back here and show you right here that there's only a phrase that's different. If the principal denies an exemption request, a parent or legal guardian may appeal to the superintendent. That's the policy that's in the books. Here's the policy. The only difference is whose decision shall be final, because without that, then families request an appeal to the board. The intent was never to have school communities appeal to the board and have the changing dynamics of the board be the deciders at the instructional level, right? At the daily practice level. But without whose decision shall be final, it leaves room for interpretation. So that's where the difference lies. And we had never entered that kind of space before. So, and to be honest, I mean, before we went into an executive session, we had to really look carefully and make sure there was, which is why we had the official legal citation embedded in our agenda. We had to make sure that we were going in it for the right reasons. And in this case, it was mostly because of FERPA. We wanted to protect any family or student identity in a sensitive situation. And I think we did that effectively and appropriately. But the board has to enter things like that for really, really serious situations like expulsion hearings. But I wonder about the role of the board at a daily instructional practice. And when we start doing that, then how frequently will you be called into action for things at the daily instructional level? And then why would you have administrators making those decisions at all, who are working and understand the context of the community, the school, the individuals involved? So it does sort of call into question roles and responsibilities.
Angela, could I chime in here?
I think you very well should.
So after the last meeting, I was contacted by Pat and by Angela, and my first response was, "That's not right. That's not right." What makes it not right is you are a standing committee of the board. The curriculum committee, the finance committee, the policy committee, we're all standing committees of the board. Standing committees of the board have no authority. So when you went into executive session and you voted, what should have happened was we made an executive session recommendation that this particular situation then comes to the full board, while still protecting the anonymity and the FERPA of this child. It would come to the full board. We would very likely then, as a full board, have to go into executive session to have this discussion. But there were 4 people of a 12-person school board that made a very important decision that can have very, very serious repercussions. We have now set precedent that any parent who's unhappy with a decision about toothpicks can go, "I don't want to do art with toothpicks," can then make a complaint to the curriculum committee and get an excuse that is neither philosophical nor religious. And that's not the intent of the law, and it's not the role of the board and of the curriculum committee. So the decision that was made is going to stand because it's too much trouble to undo it, but it does not stand. Legally, it doesn't stand. Otherwise, we could go to finance and we could work on the budget and we could say all of those in favor of passing the budget, we could do that and never even have to represent it to the full board. The board has 5 roles, and policy and curriculum and finance are 3 of them. So when it comes, it was just nobody thought of it. It was an innocent mistake, and it was a high stress. The superintendent didn't want a conflict. Angela doesn't want a conflict. It was a high stress situation, but it legally had no standing to happen. So we need to make sure that never happens again. Comments, questions? I welcome them.
I'm pretty sure I know what you're talking about. But I'm just reminding you that I'm super new, and so I'm at times struggling to kind of like follow along here, but I don't know. It sounds like, and I know it's because we're talking about this executive session, like it sounds like we're being kind of vague and a little bit
like all
Yeah, we
over the
have to be.
place. And I'm just a little
Right.
worried that that's going to sound a little, like to people watching, because I know I'm confused enough trying to like follow it, but I'm worried that people are going to be like, what are you even talking about? So
That's a great point. Why don't I provide an example that's entirely separate from a situation we
From
experienced?
this situation,
Yes.
right?
Okay. So we have in our younger grades, it is not uncommon as part of social studies around December for teachers to opt into a unit of instruction that discusses holidays around the world. So we're not highlighting or prioritizing one holiday. It does come out of a cultural standard. We continue to refine at the instructional daily practice level. We continue to refine and get better at making sure that there's adequate representation of different holidays. Some are associated with religion and some are not. And being, pretty conscientious of that, right? It's about raising awareness, not asking students to believe one. So one challenge could be if we have a family who practices as a Jehovah's Witness. So they, as I understand it, are not allowed to celebrate or even be part of ceremonies or experiences that really draw out other religious holidays. Now, please, if you are Jehovah's Witness and I misrepresented this, please don't take offense. I'm just trying to use an example, and I may be new to that part. So, and so the family may reach out to the school principal or the teacher and say, oh, I understand that X is going to be happening in class. It is our religious belief that we don't partake. Is it required by the learning results for that child to partake in learning about Hanukkah? Nope. Is there an alternative approach we can take either for the whole class or for that particular student? Is there a strategy we can work collaboratively with the family to support because based on their sincerely held religious belief? Yes. And so we would do so. And this policy would support us in doing so. On another token, in 7th or 8th grade, our students engage in units, I think it's 8th grade this year. Our students are engaging in units across social studies and English around the Holocaust. So there are multiple, we engage in a study of literature and a study of history. And recently they went to a field trip in Augusta for there's a museum or a center focused on the Holocaust. If a family was to come and say, I don't believe in the Holocaust and I want to be exempt from the Holocaust unit, my child to be exempt from the Holocaust unit, it actually isn't a sincerely held religious belief. It is both part of the learning results and in statute. There's a very specific element that the legislative body added around the study of the Holocaust that we are required to attend to. So where we can support that family is thinking, is one, what is it specifically that you're concerned about? And then maybe there's an element that we can learn more about and recognize what we're trying to teach and what the actual concern is. It might not be as broad brush, right? It might be something very specific that we can work through at the school level between the teacher and the administrator and the family. It might actually be that the book that typically is taught around the Holocaust is just so hard for my child. And I'm using this to say, I don't want them to have access because my poor child is really struggling. And in which case we have multiple texts that we're using around the Holocaust, and we'll make sure there's a text that's accessible to the child so that they can still learn and engage without embarrassment or shame or without frustration, right? So there are things that can happen at the instructional level that aren't, that don't exempt them from instruction. However, if a family just said, I just don't want to do it, I want an alternative plan, then they really do need to go through the talking with the teacher, talking with the parent, the family, the administrator, And then I guess at some point, if they need to, talking to the superintendent, but it requires every one of those bodies to go back to this. So one, is it because of a sincerely held religious belief? And then two, are these conditions part of the reason we're teaching that? Right. And then moving through a plan based on whatever is revealed in that dialogue. So none of those scenarios move us into, let's elevate this to the level of the board who set the policy and say, without, we've gone through the instructional educator, the administrator who's in charge of instruction, the superintendent who's like the lead in charge of instruction, and we're saying we're going to go beyond that, and decide if we're going to follow policy or not follow policy. Our administrators follow policy. That is our job. And you set policy. And so we're just trying to avoid having to say, when is it okay to not follow policy? Or
Right.
when is it appropriate for a board member to have to know so much about the ins and outs of a daily instructional plan to know whether policy is set or not? That's where you have the expectations on your administrative staff to follow through. Does
And
that help?
honestly,
Okay.
and that's where this sort of got a little bit muddy, because it's not expected that you as a committee are the educational leader. And so when all of the administrators that had worked on that work on these particular issues make presentations and recommendations to a committee, and the board, by making that a decision to just not follow, number one, your policy, and number two, the recommendation of the administrators that have done the work, that can send a message. I'm not saying it did, but it can send a message that you don't have confidence in the administration's capacity to work with these families and make decisions that are forward-looking while considering the needs of individual particular students. And that's a message I think we never want to send to the public or to our administrators who have worked really hard on these on every controversial, sometimes problematic, difficult decision that gets made. They work very hard on it so that when it finally comes to the board, it's well thought out. It's got facts and data and policies that drive those decisions, and our policies are all anchored in a statute somewhere. So they've done that work.
And,
know if that's helpful.
and then you're not put in a position where someone feels they don't want to follow policy. Instead, we're putting in a position like, oh, we've had experiences where we're finding this policy isn't working in the best interest of our students. We'd like to move through the policy review process out of its 5-year cycle and say, let's bring teams of people together, either at the curriculum, depending on which policy it is, and definitely at the policy level, and then at the board level, and say, because times have changed or some context has changed, you always review policy about every 5 years, but in this situation, this policy is not working as it was intended. So we'll move through a process. We're not going to just not follow that policy. We're going to recognize the trends and move through a process for advocating for a different policy in which multiple parties at all levels are reviewing that, including sometimes accessing, legal guidance just to make sure, because there are so many changing things in our legal requirements as a school, and then those changes can be made appropriately. But not as a one-off, but more as a systematic decision. The only other thing I would say about this policy is this particular note. So Chapter 127 is talking about religious beliefs. Moral or philosophical beliefs is a phrase added here, and it specifically says it can be accommodated if the board wishes to do so, as long as the content standards are satisfied by the alternative instruction or materials. I think it's important to recognize what are moral and philosophical beliefs. And I sort of want to punt that over to the policy committee, because you do a lot of wordsmithing, and I'm curious about whether this shows up in any other policy. But that's really your decision, not mine.
And this is in the Drummond and Woodsum policy review.
Yes, they
yeah,
added this
that would
note
be curious.
specifically.
Yeah, Tony, I think that would be a curious conversation. See what.
I'm really glad we're bringing this forward and giving it this level of examination and shaking it. As policy chair, I would be happy to receive this and have a further discussion about what we mean by moral or philosophical beliefs, and even to maybe repeat sincerely held moral or philosophical beliefs. Being mindful about how we define that, or what we would look for if that were to be presented, to the superintendent. Which I think the next paragraph kind of looks at, that's sort of the thing that gets detailed by the parent or the family or whatever. Just to sorry, is it in that one, or it's in the request for accommodation, and in the following section it talks about that accommodation, including where evidence regarding the sincerity of the belief. So I guess I do want to be mindful about how much, I kind of don't want to get into we're defining people's beliefs, right?
Right.
At the same time, we need to have this boundary. And again, I'm really glad this is coming forward, because yeah, the idea of having to do this repeatedly doesn't make a lot of sense, and does risk putting us in a spot where somehow the board is not aligned with our curriculum, people who are teaching and coordinating our curriculum. And I don't want to be there either. I really want to make sure that we have these policies put forward so that people can do their work and bring their expertise. And so I would tend to want to include that, just so that we don't get stuck on. I did like having a little bit of a range there, so that people don't have to necessarily declare any religion. But if they can demonstrate, that sincerely held belief, then we could accommodate that. And that makes sense here. Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is that you would like us to have a recommendation from this committee that we move this policy forward as is, so that the policy committee can just further explore the moral and philosophical beliefs portion, ensure there's clarity and unity of vision, and then that whatever comes from that edit or possible edits will then be reviewed by the full board.
So for first read. Yes, actually, I would have maybe two more notes right now,
Okay.
which is actually to talk about what the alternative instruction piece is.
Okay.
Without going into too much, I know that, got reflected. We reflected on that a little bit in the other meeting. We talked about how I think my understanding now is that alternative instruction would have to be sort of either provided by a certified teacher or certified tutor. Is that what we mean here, or is that okay to look at?
I think that is probably appropriate to discuss. It does leave it a little vague. It talks about one of the things we've gotten caught up in the past is what does independent study mean? And that doesn't just mean that someone can go do something somewhere.
Right.
And, you know, it has to have a teacher of record. A teacher of record is a certified individual, sort of based by the Maine Department of Ed standards. So maybe that sentence needs some clarification.
I would look for that, and I think, yeah, I would want that to be in there. I think for what we're intending with this policy, and again, some of this is a little more like it's coming to the superintendent and not necessarily to be read and interpreted by, you know, lay board members, so to speak, in the same sense. But I would like the clarity there.
So maybe something like alternative instruction may be provided by the school or through approved independent study and overseen by a certified teacher of record or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Is that-
And when you say
Right.
approved, Tony, just from my clarification, you're not meaning that it should come to the board for approval. You're leaving it at the administrative level.
Exactly. Either back in the other process, either I think with the building principal, or I guess this, you know, not I guess, or the superintendent if it were or appealed to that.
If it goes that far.
Yeah.
Yeah, and see here it says approved in advance by the principal. So that would be your first in consultation with the teacher that where the question arose. And this is important, right? Shall meet the standards of and objectives of the part of the curriculum that's being replaced, right? It's not just, I don't want to do it. I don't have to do it. There's a learning objective here. You know, under these specific circumstances, if we can provide an alternate pathway to that learning objective, because of your sincerely held religious beliefs, we will do that. And here's the plan on how we're going to do that. And hopefully all of that would happen, you know, in most cases, all of that could happen right at the building level between the teacher, administrator, and family.
And just Megan, so I want to make sure we answer your questions about this and that we're clear, but it should never really come to our level. I mean, we approve curriculum and we hand that off to the superintendent and to Angela, and everyone else works for her or him, whoever the superintendent is. And the superintendent is our one employee. So for us to get into the weeds of the minutia of what their role is really kind of an overreach, because we're not necessarily, any of us, educators. Maybe some of us are, maybe some of us aren't. And everyone has value that's on the board, but we need to know and be certain that we have that we come prepared, that we know what our roles are, so that we can best support the administration and their work, and that our two responsibilities line up next to each other and don't bump against each other. We just need to know, be really clear about that with everyone.
That makes a lot more sense. Yeah, that makes a lot more sense to me. And just to throw out, like, I think that where all the stuff about the alternative instruction is in my memory, where we really like kind of went into a different place. And that I feel like is what, if I'm thinking of the right stuff, I mean, I feel like I remember being really stuck into the specific sentence that says that may be provided by the school. And then everybody was kind of like, oh, well, it can be provided. Well, it may be provided and it can be provided, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be provided.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like that part was a little confusing to us at that time, maybe.
And that's partly because independent study as a term can, especially in high school, can sometimes mean for example, Rayanne DeSoto is overseeing an independent study, but some of the actual learning is happening by like a researcher at Jackson Lab with the student on a routine basis. And then Rayanne's continually overseeing what are the inputs, what are the objectives, what is the student output, and what are the hours. And so she really does have a level of oversight and intention around it. But because the student's in a position for that unique experience, we're not going to just hand it off to the researcher at Jackson Lab who doesn't ever teach in schools. So it's in partnership with, so that's partly why instead of will be provided by the school, maybe allows for under independent studies, that flexibility to create partnerships that are really in the best interest of students, but still have the oversight of a certified teacher towards the objectives we're trying to get, like a graduation requirements or whatever it is, learning results. Yeah, it gets tricky. This is why our work is tricky. So for now, can we have something to allow us to move forward with the maintenance of the note that's currently on page 1 for the policy committee to look at, and a note about overseen by a certified teacher of record as connected to independent study, just for clarity. Is
So
there
would you like a motion?
Yes, please. I
motion to
think that's
carry
what I'd
that?
like, Becky.
Okay, so I'd like to entertain from someone a motion to move this policy with the amended language and note to the full board, to the policy committee for them to work on it, which will then go for a first reading and then follow through the policy process.
I'll make a motion for what Becky said.
My convoluted language. And Tony, was that a second?
Yes.
Okay,
Second.
thank you. Questions or comments? All those in favor?
I can see 4 of you and they're all hands up, so we'll say it's a unanimous.
Great. Thank you,
agreement.
Angela.
Okay, so the next ones are a lot easier.
all
So
easy.
we have KA, which is our school community home relations and priority objectives. Basically, this just ensures that we will work to ensure there's active and ongoing communication and involvement between our families and our school. And there are some details around that. And the reason I added this one in is because the next one is very specific to Title I. And so this is the broad one that comes, that just broadly speaking, it is our goal and objective to build positive interaction both ways between schools and families. This is that statement that says this is our intent. And it just hadn't been reviewed since 2016, so I added it to this so then it would give context to the next policy. I didn't have any changes. That's why.
Angela, this is a really good one also because we're coming up in my legislative committee meeting today. We're working on the Parents' Bill of Rights, and this is all really good stuff to encourage families, parents, community members to be involved, and to know through policies like this one that that we are working to create and maintain that sort of that schools are community places. Schools are community gathering places. And so that parents, absolutely, this can fit right in that very nicely with families and parents knowing that they already have the rights that they think they may not have, and how much better we can do with that. So I like that.
Should we just do this as one bundle because it's all around the same theme, or do you want to do each one?
I will conspire with you, Tony. What do you think? Should we do them together? What do you think?
I think, sorry, checking the unmuted. I think as a bundle makes sense because they're all related. And the ones that are coming back are drawn or that we're looking at the rescind, right, because of the active one.
Yep.
Yeah.
Great. So in doing that, I'm going to move us into this one. So because we receive federal funds that are part of Title I, we have literacy and math intervention practices in our K-5 buildings. Technically, Title I is in LER, Pittston, Randolph, and Riverview. And technically, we fund the same level of intervention at Helen Thompson through local funds. Their free and reduced lunch rate disqualifies them from accessing federal funds for the same service. So, but because of comparability laws, we have to, what we provide in Title I communities, provide also in non-Title I communities. It's where the complexity lies. So while it says parental involvement in Title I, we really mean this for all of our schools that provide this level of service. There are a few changes, but as you can see, this is just another layer of naming and clarifying parent involvement, which includes guardians, caregivers, family members, right? That the school district, instead of the language was weird, develop jointly with, agree on with, and distribute to. I just changed it to work collaboratively with parents of children. I already see an error. It should say parents and caregivers or families and caregivers, something like that, of children participating in the school system's Title I program to develop and support a written district level parent involvement policy. So we have practices that parents do contribute to. Every few years, we bring them in to look at our family school compact. We ask questions about the impact Title I has had on their learners, what's worked, what hasn't worked. We use that data to refine our system. And then at the school level, each school has at least one parent involved in some annual look at data and practices at the school level that work, or where we could identify areas of growth. So that's really, it says we have a practice that we involve families. Then under the school involvement, it just clarifies that further, which says we need to have a compact, which we do. And that is, we follow this policy. I made an adjustment here because of the times. So instead of monitoring television watching, we ask parents to monitor screen time. And then down here in parent involvement meetings, because of the way we have multiple schools providing intervention services in literacy and math, and we have some common systemic practices, and we already have a place in which parents can engage at the school level. One of the things that we're sort of missing is that bringing it back together as a district, right? So we do that through the administrative realm. We bring our teams together administratively, but I'd like to ensure that we have a more systematic approach to doing that district-wide at this level. So instead of each school receiving Title I funds, which would preclude Helen Thompson because they don't receive Title I funds, it says the district will convene an annual meeting to which all parents or guardians of children accessing Tier 3 services funded by Title I. Because that's really the key. Title I is not, it's a funding source with lots of rules. It's Tier 3 literacy interventions that's actually the service provided. So just clarifying that to inform the district about participation in Title I, involve them in the planning, review, and improvement of the district's programs and parent involvement policy. So it's sort of a both and now. It's having parents involved at the more 3 times a year school review of data and some decisions around school practices. And then because we're a system and we have more unified practices in place, having that district convening just to kind of make sure that that's accurate. Is that really true? Is that really happening across the district? And how can we do that more systematically, especially like where we have LER sending to Riverview? And then I just I just changed a few small features in the next paragraph. We have parent-teacher conferences. They are offered 2 times a year for all students. But this is a Title I policy or an intervention policy. And so the reality is, we want to be able to offer parent-teacher conferences specific to Title I services or intervention services at times that are convenient to them. And we do that at least annually, if not more often than that. So it's one specific conference in the spring by appointment, and then other opportunities based on the need of the student and the families. So just instead of saying you can only meet 2 times, like we're doing fall and spring, sometimes fall conferences for Title I don't actually work because we don't have all the students enrolled in that upcoming system, because sometimes they happen before all of our data is available to us. So this is just clarifying that. And then what these meetings, other meetings we will have for parents will be about. And then I just took another policy that had this and put it into this policy. What's the role of the principal in this process? So we have staff, and then we have district. And so what's the building leader's role? And it's just drawing it in from another policy, so we didn't have to have more and more policies saying the same thing. So that's what those underlines are. And then nothing else is different. So just for clarity, the reason then we would rescind this is because E1 is the district level parent policy. And I felt like it was repeating almost everything from the first one with a few exceptions, which is why I made the edits. And then E, and you can see it goes on and on. And in some areas, we don't actually, our building leader works with our parent-teacher organizations, right? That's a routine practice. It's not really as a result of Title I. And then our preschool program is inside our schools now. So that didn't make a lot of sense. And it goes, as you can see, it keeps going on and on. And so E2 is the elementary school parent policy, which is the exact same thing we already did in the first policy. So it's just really what it is an organization looked at the requirements and drafted multiple versions of policies so that a board could review and say which one works best for our community based on our structure. And at some point, we just sort of adopted all of them. But we were really saying the same thing over and over. So I was trying to streamline it and say, what are they all saying? And let's have it in one policy so that we're really clear. And then we wouldn't have to, because you see this paragraph here at the top is the exact same paragraph that was in the policy that I first shared,
The
right?
compact, yep. the parent- Yeah,
Except for then we outline more about the compact, right?
right.
Here's the building principal designee part. I added that in where it seemed appropriate. This statement is in that, I made sure it was already in the first policy. It's just not a letter. It's a sentence within a policy that we try to do this. So do you see how this, and then here we are repeating the parent compact. The difference is in this policy, everything that's in our compact is now also written into policy. Well, that's a lot for a policy. The compact is what are the objectives? And then like in policy, the policy should say, what is the objective of a parent school compact? And then the parent school compact is developed and we say all these things in it. So it doesn't need to be in policy, it needs to be in the compact. Right? So do you need in policy that parents should provide assistance encouraging their children to complete homework assignments? I'm not sure you want that in your policy, but you definitely want it in a compact where families are having conversations with their teachers and talking about what that looks like and means like, what it means. Or like, do you want in your policy that parents should talk with their children every day about school? Or do you want that in the compact as the agreement, and the policy is around the objective of a compact, which is what are the strategies we engage in as families when my child gets extra services? And what are the strategies we engage in as a school community to ensure your child gets the services they need to get closer to core instruction? So do you see what I did? I felt like some of those nitty-gritty things weren't really appropriate for a policy,
Right,
unless you want to hold people accountable to that, which doesn't seem
Right.
fair.
we can't make policies about things we can't control.
Right.
Yeah.
So that is why I'm requesting that we rescind E1 and E2, edit as I did, KBF, and keep that as our sole parent engagement in Title I, which clarifies district level engagement, school level engagement, and the partnership between schools and families.
That seems great.
Any-
Comments from folks? My lights just flickered. So would you like a motion then to send these to the policy?
If you need it, then I will take it so that we can be official.
Let's do that so that so that it's on the record. So would someone be willing to make that motion? To send these policies to the policy committee to be rescinded.
To support the edits in KBF and to rescind KBF E1 and
Correct.
E2.
That's the motion. Thank you, Angela. Do we have a willing victim to do that?
I would be happy to do that. Actually, I don't see Megan on my screen anymore.
Oh, did she
I'd be happy
drop
to,
off?
sorry.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Well, we have
Um,
3 out of 5. Is that
So
allowed?
that's still a quorum, right?
Okay.
That's still a quorum.
I would make that motion, as Becky declared, to advance the edits on KBF. So sorry, I think KA and KBF, and then to recommend rescission of
Yes.
the other 2.
Perfect. I can second it. All those in favor? Motion carries.
Great. Okay, policies are done. Can I I know we're a little over. Can I just briefly share a slide deck? I'll put it in the agenda minutes. Okay. Board. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. We set at the beginning of the year as a district some targeted goals across 3 years, some objective across 3 years with targeted annual goals. In the fall, I kind of brought forward this notion of sort of a national picture of where achievement is going in numeracy at the top and literacy at the bottom. Basically, we talked through how the pandemic, someone is cooking in my house, can you tell? Sorry. How the pandemic has impacted our student learning and their ability to accelerate in their learning, and that is true for us, and we're trying to reverse that trend. And I shared with you how this is our data profile over the years for grade 8 proficiency in math. I chose grade 8 because that is one of the grade levels that the NAEP test looks at. So I wanted to see where we fell according to that. And as you can see, we are slowly working to improve. These are fall scores, with the exception of this winter score. So what this really shows is in 8th grade, our average is 32% of our students were at meets or exceeds using NUIA math as our test in the fall, and 30% are in the winter. Couple things to note. The standards are year-long standards, so there's an expectation they're continuing in their growth along that standard across a year. So there's sort of these little benchmarks that they have to hit to get to that year-end statement. And so it doesn't mean that they're not learning at all. It just means that the same students, generally speaking, are learning, and the same students are struggling to get to the level of proficiency we're looking for. Now, also doesn't mean that 70% of our students aren't making growth. They're probably making significant growth. They're just probably not yet at the proficiency benchmark score that they need. So that's the difference between showing you a growth report and an achievement report. This is an achievement report. So there's some stability here, because 2 points is not that different.
Right.
What we really want to see is at the end of the year that this spikes up. There's certainly a lot of effort being put into instruction and interventions. We do have some concerns around attendance, which impacts instruction. In 4th grade, we have a little bit of an uptick. It's 3 points, so it's not that much different from the middle school as an average across our 4th grades. I did put, we have our Riverview 4th grade has hit the 50%, but the 50%, that 50% of their students are at meets and exceeds right now based on the winter assessment. Can they hold that through the year or get more than that? That's what we're looking for. Our target is that 50% of our students will meet or exceed proficiency in reading at the end of this year, and that by next year we get to 60%, and then we get higher. So we have this outlier school that we're really excited about. But we have a ways to go to get back to where we once were. Just so you're aware, we use the NUIA, which is a long-standing assessment we've been using in this district. In our early grades, we use Early Bird. It's a literacy screener for K and 1 that's more age appropriate. So I'm not reporting on those today. I'll do that in the spring. And we use something called iReady Math Diagnostic in the elementary grades. And obviously in the high school, we're in the middle of a semester break at the time we do standardized assessments, and they're working on their exam schedule. So we don't add another standardized assessment to the students' plates when they're trying to learn how to do mid-year exams or final exams. We will do a check with them in the spring. So in literacy, here's our goal. 80% of students by 2025 will be proficient. Our target is 60%. It's a very bold target given our current status. The blue represents their score at the beginning of the year based on the beginning. If the standard is set and there's a beginning of the year benchmark, how many are proficient? And then the red represents where we're falling in the winter. So 1st grade, we don't assess at the beginning of the year. So that's their first score. And then you can see the only grade level that's actually falling ahead of the fall score is 5th grade right now. So that's disappointing. But it doesn't tell the whole story. And so I'll talk a little bit more how we tell the whole story over time. Oops, if I can change my slide. In math, our target is again in 2025 that 80% of our students will be proficient using these assessment tools. And so our target for the first year is 50%. Okay, red is winter and blue was the fall. So in literacy, in 0 is kindergarten. So they do iReady in kindergarten in the fall. So this is towards end of year grade level expectations. 18% of our kindergartners were proficient at that time. And now we're already up to almost 70% of our kindergartners. So our kindergarten class is coming in the first time with full day instruction, and they're making great gains. It's a solid foundation. We're thrilled. Our first grade class is up to just over 40% as a whole unit across 3 buildings. So that's getting close to our target. We're finding that you can see that there's a dip in 2nd and 3rd grade. Not by classroom, but overall across all of the grade, all of the classrooms combined. So I'm not highlighting any particular individual. And then by 5th grade, we start to pick that back up in these particular cohorts. So in all grades, there's growth. You can see that, right, between the blue and the red. So we just need to look, we're going to do some work at the administrative level, at the coaching level, to see like, what can we do to sort of accelerate between now and the end of the school year, that 2nd and 3rd grade group. What do we know about our bright spots? And what do we need to know, or what resources need to be made available to further and support more growth in some of these grade levels? So that's our target, is that line. You can here is our upper grade levels using a different assessment tool, the NUIA. So we don't use a winter assessment in the high school, so that's why the red is stopping. But you can see that using a separate tool, the proficiency score, the achievement score, is either fairly stable if you look at 5th grade, or shows greater gaps between the fall and winter score. Again, remember that standard is year. So what is that standard supposed to look like at the beginning of the year? What does it look like in produce at the middle of the year and kind of the end of the year? So little, the 8th grade, I know they're working really, really hard in 8th grade. So why is there such a gap present is something we just need to kind of look at and understand. I will tell you that initially looking at the data, based on the tools I have available, and before having opportunities to talk with the administrators and the educators who are constantly analyzing this data and trying to understand, what does it mean? What do I know? What can I do next? I mean, these people are rock stars at what they're trying to evolve. There's a possible trend. This is not definitive, but when we have classrooms that have high quality instructional materials, which you've invested in over time, and it takes a while to learn how to implement those effectively and efficiently, experienced educators that are both strong in the content and pedagogy of that content area. So that's the challenge with elementary. Some of our elementary teachers are incredible at literacy, and they're really developing their content knowledge and pedagogy and math, right? You can't be perfect at everything, and we expect our elementary teachers to be perfect at everything. And so that's just one example of what I mean by content and pedagogy. And this does not discredit any of our newer teachers, but when our newer teachers are learning like 5 or 6 different content area curricula and trying to implement those with the greatest level of skill, it takes a while to do well at that. Additionally, the stronger results happen when also those classrooms have strong student attendance. So students are regularly showing up and in school all day, and those students are able to focus consistent. And so that's a challenge we're finding coming out of the pandemic, is that level of being able to sustain oneself through a task is really, really challenging. I think it's challenging for us adults sometimes, and it's particularly challenging for students. So like, this is just a graphic example of a class that started in the fall, the profile of that class in literacy at the 37th percent, and this same bright spot class, same exact class in the winter, showing up at a 62nd percent level of proficiency. So you can see, so red is students who are significantly below grade level at that point in time, based on that one moment in the assessment. Whereas green and blue are meeting and exceeding. Do you see how that works kind of along the continuum? So this classroom had significant changes, and it's an illustration of sort of all these components coming together and working simultaneously towards the same outcome. Some of these situations are within our control and we're going to keep working on and getting better at. And some of these elements or criteria are not within our control, but we can continue to build partnerships with families so that we can all do this together. That is really what I have to share at the mid-year, which is we're working really hard. We're learning about, the results and what it's teaching us, and we're not there yet.
It's almost there. We're getting there. Megan's internet went out, so she's tried to reboot, but she's not booting. That's really interesting information, Angela. That's good.
Yeah, thank you very much, as always. And of course, you have a PowerPoint ready to go, so that's just awesome. And great content. And I really appreciate how we're using data to kind of drive what our goals are, and providing areas to focus on. And even that last slide that showed like so granular. It's so great to be able to look at classes in the abstract, but also that's a specific class and where their challenges were and where there are bright spots. So I really appreciate it. I know Matt Marshall brought a lot of that appreciation too, that being able to, it gives us a really clear view of what's happening, across our district. So I really appreciate it, for sure.
No, it really does. And that's what we hoped for years, was that kind of, that ability to get down to that minutia without naming the spot where it's bad, but knowing knowing where the weaknesses are and being able to spot check them and keep track. So that's really great.
Thank you. And just trying to keep you informed and up to date as to where we are. It's not the story of the classroom experience, right? That if you could see what's happening in these classrooms on a daily basis, and the skills the teachers have employed at thinking really carefully about what is the thing that's holding this child back, and how can I spend 10 extra minutes with this child or small group of children and help them close that gap in that skill so that they can access the next information more easily with less frustration and greater pride. They're doing that. Every one of them is doing it everywhere. The key is just getting the whole system to line up and make sure they have the time, that they have the resources, they have the support, they continue to develop in their content knowledge and pedagogy. The students are at school every day. And that we help students also develop that ability to sustain. I mean, in this age of, we're constantly bombarded socially, through social media. We're doing 12 things at once all the time. The Snapchats on, the TV shows on, the homework's out, the dog is barking. We're always managing that as adults. We're managing that as young people. It makes it really hard to learn how to sustain a focus on a task. And it's, I don't know if it was there before the pandemic and we didn't notice it as such, or if it's just become, we've developed other habits during that, and now we have to kind of build up these more sustainable habits. I don't know. I'm certainly not the expert in that, but what we can do is continue to build relationships and engage and try to move the needle for our learners. Everyone, I just want to be really cautious, because data only tells one piece of the story, right? And the last thing I want anyone walking away from is people aren't doing their jobs, or that, because that's not the case at all. There's no significant drops, but there's this we're not yet over the hump kind of data is what it's really telling us. We're not quite there yet to get to that level of sort of acceleration that we'd like to see. So thank you for your time.
We'll get there.
Yeah, yeah, and we're keeping the eye on the prize. I mean, we're all focused. Everyone's focused on this. It's, you know, I think having a goal matters and trying to achieve it matters and learning from it matters. So those are all
Absolutely.
present.
Absolutely.
But I know that we're over our time. But we've been kind of putting off this data talk for a while because we've had so many other priorities. So thank you for taking that time. I'll try to maybe hopefully next month's agenda will be a little bit lighter, so we can have a little bit shorter meeting. But I thank you for the extended time.
Absolutely.
Is there anything else?
My dog says it's dinner time.
Yeah, I think my whole family does too. Great. So our next meeting on some Tuesday, April 11th at 3:30, and hopefully in person without a snow day.
Hopefully snow days will be over. Man, it's really snowing.
Yeah.
Jeepers.
Thank you, Terry, for helping us out. I'll see some of you at
Yes, Terry,
5:30.
All right, I'll see you
Yep.
shortly. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Yeah, see you soon. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, see you in a few. Yeah.